Okay, good evening. I would like to welcome everybody to the Willits City Council meeting for April 13th at 6:30 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting to order and begin with the pledge to the flag. If you'll please join us. Kathy, will you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we'll have a roll call.
Yes, this is Larry.
Hi, Larry. Welcome.
Thank you.
Councilmember Strong.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Present.
Stransky.
Yes.
Connie.
Yes.
And Mayor Rodriguez.
Present. All right, before we move on to the agenda, if there's no objections, I would like to change the order just slightly. We have topic number 3.8. It's a continuation of the public hearing, and I believe there are many people who want to join us this evening, and the agenda will move along quickly, and we have some other items that we want to make sure that we can get in before we get too deep into this matter, and should only take a few minutes. So I'd like to move item number 3 just after item number 9A, if there's no objections from council or any objections from our attorney. All right, having heard none, we'll move on. I did put in the chat, if you look at the sidebar, if you're using the link to look on this screen, there's a chat bar on the right. If you'd like to speak to an item on the agenda tonight, please indicate the item number and state your name. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and when I call upon you, there's only one opportunity to speak on each agenda item. At the end of the 3 minutes, the timer will buzz, notifying you that your time has completed. I thank you for your comments and welcome your feedback. Councilmember Strong, you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know how to see a chat on my screen.
Look at the top of your screen. Do you see like a little bubble? It almost looks like a Q towards the upper right corner.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Click on there. That's your chat. So you can type your name and the item number you'd like to speak to, and that way for those of you that are on the phone, I'll pause and give you an opportunity to state your name and write it down, and then I'll call on each of you. You can speak once on each item that's on the agenda. Okay? So for example, if you'd like to speak during public communications, you can do so and then speak on another agenda item. So I just want to make that clarification. All right. So before us is item number 2, public communications. So again, the City Council welcomes participation in its meetings. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person, so that everyone has an opportunity to address the council. To expedite matters and avoid repetition, whenever any group of persons wishes to address the council on the same subject matter, the mayor may request the group appoints a spokesperson. The item is listed to matters under the jurisdiction of the City Council, which are not on the posted agenda. Public criticism of the City Council, Commission, boards, and agencies will not be prohibited, and the City Council cannot take action on these items. So if you would like to address us on an item that is not on the agenda, now would be the time. I don't see anybody in the chat that would like to speak. Is there anybody who's calling in from the public that would like to speak to an item not on the agenda? Okay, having heard none and seen none in the chat, I'm going to close the public communications and move on to item number 4, enactment of ordinances. We have none before us. Item number 5 is our consent calendar. The following items are presented before City Council for this evening. There are no minutes attached. There is a resolution ratifying extending for an additional 30 days approval of continuing virtual City Council, Commission, and committee meetings pursuant to AB 361. And then the third item is a resolution approving revised 2021-2022 classification and compensation schedule. Resolution approving wage adjustments for the swimming pool staff. Council, do you have any questions, or would you like to make a motion on this consent calendar? Councilmember Gonzalez?
I would like to move the consent agenda.
I would like to second it, Larry.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Would anybody from the public like to address us? All right, bringing it back to council. Councilmember Strong?
Yeah, I know I expressed at our last meeting that I'm still a little uncomfortable with meeting in person, but on the other hand, I've also continued to hear people in the public say that they don't find this a very user-friendly format for commenting and knowing what's going on. So I just want us to keep that option in our minds to get back to in-person meetings as soon as possible. But another 30 days is okay with me.
Okay, with that said, when our 30 days is up, that would put us at approximately the first meeting in May. Would council entertain that as a tentative day to go back to in-person meetings? And if so, are there any particular protocols that you would like to see put in place?
I just suggest that we consider it instead of talking about it right now, but consider it maybe at our next meeting so that we have a chance to figure out what those conditions might be.
Okay, so pass this evening and then put it on as an agenda item. Is that your intent?
Yes.
Okay. Anything further from other council members? Okay, I'll call for the vote.
Councilmember Strong,
Yes.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Mayor Rodriguez.
Yes. All right, monthly activity reports, there are none. Commissions, agencies, and authorities, we are not meeting as the Planning Commission this evening on any topics. And so moving right along to item number 8, which is the City Manager reports and recommendations. I'll turn it over to City Manager Brian Bender.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council. As you can see on the agenda and as in your packet, I do not have any specific or prepared materials for your consideration tonight. It's been a little hectic around here, but I can promise you the next meeting on the 27th, you're going to have a full packet. But I do want to take the opportunity right now to acknowledge the work, the dedication, the effort, and the service to the community that our dispatchers over at the police department provide. This is National Dispatcher Week. They do amazing tasks. They're the front line in providing law enforcement and protective services, and just overall assistance to the community. They have a tough job at times. Other times they're really just helping out the community when people need the most assistance. So I just wanted to recognize their effort under Chief Liga Ryder's leadership over there. We're working hard to fill some of our staffing gaps, but with the staff we have now, the team is solid. They're doing a great job, and like I said, I just want to acknowledge their efforts to date. We shouldn't be acknowledging them just once a week, once a year. We should do it as much as we can, and that's something I'll work on in the future. So that's what I have tonight.
All right, thank you. And yes, a token of our appreciation is warranted year-round. So you're appreciated. All right. Let's see. Number 9, department recommendations. We have one item: adopt a resolution announcing the intent of the City Council to adopt an ordinance to enforce provisions of Senate Bill 1383. Our presenting staff member is our building official, Davey Bowles.
Thank you, Mayor Rodriguez, council members. SB 1383 became effective January 1st of this year. The city did apply and was granted a waiver for quite a bit of this law, mainly the 3 organic waste containers for businesses and that collection service and record keeping, and a lot of things that are other jurisdictions are having a real difficult time with. We have a 5-year waiver. They granted us the maximum. On the other hand, we are actually complying with a lot of that. We give a lot of credit to our solid waste provider. We currently have green waste bins. We're allowed to put that waste in, and we do actually recycle quite a bit of our waste here in Willits, even though we do have a waiver. The main issues that we have here is what's before you is actually a resolution, is a notice of intent to comply. So basically, we're notifying Cal Recycle that we, as City of Willits, intend to comply with state law. Currently, there's 3 items that we want to notify them on where we are have fallen behind. Basically, one is the model water efficient landscaping ordinance. That law actually passed in 2015. We do currently enforce it through planning and building permits when we issue that. It only applies to required landscaping, 500 square feet or more. The last project we had was Mendocino that required that. But the Cal Recycle is now in charge of that. Passing this law puts them in charge of that, and they require a local ordinance with enforceable mechanisms for us to basically fine or enforce businesses that aren't compliant. So basically, we want to write that ordinance and adopt it. The second one is the Cal Green Building Codes. Again, we currently enforce that through Title 24. There's 2 items that Cal Green has now oversight over, which are pertains to recycling and organic waste at apartment buildings and commercial buildings. We currently do comply with that, but we do not have an ordinance that is worded appropriately for that. So we want to get that up to date. And then the other one is a provision of SB 1383, which is the procurement of recovered organic waste products. So there's multiple ways for jurisdictions to meet this requirement. Purchasing biofuels, natural gas recovery. Unfortunately, in our jurisdiction, we don't have the ability to utilize those. We don't have those facilities within our location. So what it boils down to is basically there's 2 options. We can basically buy mulch and compost that meets the criteria. The amount of mulch we have to buy, it's a simple formula. You multiply the population of the city by 0.08, comes around to about 400 tons of mulch, 400. And they actually have a conversion for compost, which is by the yard, but it's about 500 yards of compost. Speaking with staff and utilities, we currently do not have a capacity to utilize that much. We put in our notice that we are researching ways that we can accomplish this, and there have been a bunch of great ideas thrown about, putting that requirement maybe in on our contracts for, when we hire people to do our streets and landscaping, having them purchase that much mulch. Possibly when we do parks, landscaping, purchase that. So currently we don't have a exact plan on how we're going to require that. The state law, the actual wording actually says you can actually just buy it and give it away, which sounds great, but it's 400 tons is a very large amount of compost. So These are all fairly simple things, but we want to be in compliance with Cal Recycle. This is a very good goal, so it's a short-lived climate pollution. Basically, food waste is one of the highest contributors to greenhouse gases, and so this is one of the fastest ways to combat climate change, and so we want to be in compliance with it. And so we recommend passing this resolution so that we can move forward with enacting an ordinance. We are going to task our consultants with drafting these ordinances to speed up the process a little bit. Rough estimates right now are approximately $5,000 for a consultant to do these, and we intend to have them completed by September 1st. And that date is my goal because the following month we actually have our electronic annual report due to Cal Recycle, and I would like to report that, yes, we are in full compliance with state law. So, if there's any questions, I think that's as long as I need to discuss it. If you have any specific questions, please.
Councilmember Strong?
Yes, I support that whole idea, but I was just also wondering, since all cities are having to do this, isn't there a model ordinance already on the shelf, basically, like Ukiah or somebody who's already done this, rather than hire extra?
That's correct. That's why our budget is extremely low. We plan on tasking them to do the exact same thing. With basically, we will provide them with the model ordinance that we would like to establish, and also modify it specifically for Willits, slightly, and draft that. This was proposed based on staff time and based to the necessity to have it done by September 1st. I mean, technically, this is supposed to be already on the books. That's why we're giving them the notice of intent to comply, because it's an intent to comply, because we currently are not in compliance. So we are having additional workforce to help us get it done on time. But yes, this is something staff could do if we had a little more time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez?
Just a question for Brian. So this will be in our budget workshop. This will be a line item, I'm assuming, in Davy's budget.
Yes, it's going to need to be programmed into the budget as it's being prepared for your consideration.
Thank you.
Just going back to Councilmember Strong's observation there, it's like Davey noted, we're a little bit on a time constriction, and we have talked about it internally, and we think it's the best use of a few $1,000s to grab a document, modify it for our needs, and then configure it so it fits into our existing codes. We think a few $1,000s to expedite that whole process is well worth the investment. Right now community development is still a little short staff, and we just think that's a wise investment of the time and money that we have available.
Any other council members? Okay, do we have any members of the public that would like to address us on this matter? All right, I'll bring it back up here to council members. I'll entertain a motion.
Gonzalez would like to move staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember Gonzalez. Do we have a second?
Yes, this is Larry.
Thank you, Councilmember Stransky. All right, I'll call for the vote.
Councilmember Strong?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Connie?
Yes.
And Mayor Rodriguez?
Yes. All right, we will be moving back to item number 3, which is a continuation of the public hearing from February 9th, 2022, discussion and possible action adopting a resolution to approve an initial study mitigation, negative declaration, and mitigation monitoring reporting program for the groundwater resiliency improvement project and conditionally approving the project with the adoption of the groundwater operational use plan, establishing the parameters for the use of the groundwater system. I stated at the beginning of the meeting that if you are with us virtually, you're able to see us on your screen. Please click on the chat in the upper right corner of your screen and type in your name. And I'll be happy to give you an opportunity to speak. For those of you who are on the phone, there are 10 callers on the phone. I want to remind you that I see that each of you has not muted your line. So please be very mindful of the fact that when you're talking, we can hear you unless you've muted your line. We do want to hear from the public, and if you would like to speak on this item, I'll pause for a moment and give an opportunity just simply to state your name, and then I'll call on you when it's your turn.
Madam Mayor, if I may inject here, with the number of callers who just activated to be live mic, I think we need to have them basically only one live mic at a time. We're just going to get a lot of feedback and background noise and make it hard to understand comments. So that's our suggestion.
I sent Dolores a message. Is there a way that you can facilitate opening up one mic at a time on the callers?
I believe Kathy's going to have to do that at this time. I do not have control of the meeting at this time.
Well, in that case, I mean, go ahead, Kathy.
I will do my best.
Oh,
They don't always.
I just want to, in that case, like, just echo the comments by Mayor Rodriguez, is that if you're a caller, please be mindful of others speaking, be careful of background noise and just other noise that can confuse the conversation. Like that.
Okay, go ahead and if you'd like to state your name and somebody talks at the same time, just pause and wait a moment since we're trying to give everybody an opportunity. I'm opening it up.
This is John Almeida. Can you hear me?
Yes, I've got you, John. Thank you.
Do you want me to wait for later? You just want my name right now?
Yes, just your name. And I do see that you also posted in the chat, so I do have you there too. Thank you, John.
There was a notice up there a few minutes ago that said this meeting would close in 60 minutes. I don't know if there's something technical difficulty or what. I don't know if anybody else seen that.
Nothing on my end. Do we have any other callers that would like to address us on this item?
Yes.
Yes, this is Richard Estabrook.
Richard Estabrook. Okay, next caller.
Randy Dalton.
Randy Dalton, I have you.
Ellen Drell.
Alan Drell. Any others? Okay, thanks, callers. Oh, go ahead.
Did you get Raspberry powder? David Drell.
Sabrina, did you get Rosamond Crowder's name too?
Yes, after Rosamond, there were two people that spoke at the same time. I did not get your name. If I didn't repeat it, feel free to do so.
Sherry Ebiam?
Did you say Sherry?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
David Drell.
David, I have your down as well. Thank you. All right, and then I also have a few people who've made note in the chat bar, so I will make sure that we get to you. Just reminding everyone what I stated earlier, so I'll just read it real quick. Let's see. You'll have 3 minutes to speak when I call upon you. You only have one opportunity to speak on each agenda item. So keep in mind that you have a 3-minute limit. And then at the end of the 3 minutes, the buzzer will sound notifying you that your time has completed. We thank you for your comments and we welcome the feedback. And I will begin, let's see, with before I begin with public comment, my apologies. I'm going to bring it back to City Manager to introduce the item and add any additional information or clarifications before we open it up. Maybe council will even want to speak on the matter before we move to public comment. So please stay with us. And again, if you're calling in and your line is not muted, just be mindful that we can hear everything in the background.
With that cue, I will do a quick introduction and kind of a roadmap of what we like to cover tonight. We have Rod Wilburn, the city engineer. He has a presentation. We have about 7 slides that he will present and discuss. It's basically an overview of the project and the ground that we have covered, and then the new material that will be presented tonight for the benefit of the general public and the council's consideration. We also have supporting staff that are present to answer questions that we believe will be forthcoming during the public comment section. And I appreciate the council's willingness to adjust the schedule. Now we have essentially all night to talk about this, and we're all looking forward to this topic. I do believe we're kind of coordinating between Kathy and Dolores on the slides. So we just give us a little time as we load each one up and bring the forward each individual slide. So with that, I will hand it over to Rod. We have, like I said, we have a very informal presentation to cover. Some of the new material, and the one thing we want to emphasize is the operations plan that was asked to be provided by the council at our last meeting back in February. That has gone through some significant review and commentary, both internally and externally. So we have that. So knowing that, and this is an exciting topic for everyone, I will hand it off to Rod.
Brian. Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. As stated earlier, this is a continuation of the February 9th meeting. We'll talk about the groundwater resiliency improvement project and the operational use plan that was born out of the last meeting. So, Kathy, can you pull up the slide show, please? Just real quickly, as Brian stated, we'll cover summary of the project. Tonight we are looking at adoption of the initial study and mitigated negative declaration, as well as the adoption of an operational use plan. As far as the two components or the two documents, they serve different functions. We've established that. And the initial study mitigated negative declaration has sufficiently analyzed all potential environmental impacts of the groundwater resiliency project. Next slide, please, Kathy. So to revisit the scope of the project, just to be clear, the purpose of this project is to improve the efficiency of the current system, replacing 30,610 feet of the existing water main between the Elias well and the north end of the enhancement wetlands, currently a 6-inch Schedule 40 water line that was put in for irrigation purposes at some time in the past, is slated to be replaced with 10-inch HDPE pipe. Originally, this was proposed to be 8-inch C900 PVC. The difference between PVC and HDPE, not to get too technical here, is the HDPE has a similar inside diameter with a 10-inch main versus an 8-inch main. The second item is replacing the existing 30 horsepower pump in the Elias well with a new 40 horsepower pump. Thirdly, we'll be installing a 250,000 gallon chlorine contact tank at the groundwater treatment plant to provide chlorine contact time, as well as a greater ability to control pressure from the treatment facility, the treated water, into the distribution system. And in order to do so, we have to have a new pump facility installed between that tank and the distribution system as it sits now. So, next slide, please. As stated earlier, this is a mitigated negative declaration. The mitigation for the project are associated with the construction of the pipe and the constructed wetlands between the enhancement wetlands and the Elias replacement well. This is a list of mitigations identified through the CEQA analysis, and from biological resources to the cultural resources, geology and soils, as well as hydrology and water quality. Extensive consultation happened with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Regional Water Quality Control Board, and Department of Fish and Wildlife. Next slide, please. So this is the new item that comes from the last meeting. We had outlined it roughly in the last meeting, and since then we put it to paper. We received comments. We made some revisions, and this is an outline of the document, and essentially broken down into these allowable uses during emergencies, during the annual routine flushing, which is a maintenance component of the system. It may need to be used when maintenance of the system arises. The prime example is when the interior of the 3 million gallon tank was lined. That was taken offline, so the groundwater treatment plant was used to supplement the water to the city residents. Would also be used regular operation to ensure that it's operational when it's needed. You have to operate the facility probably monthly, if not bi-weekly, to make sure that when you need it, it's available. And finally, to supplement this use of surface water in case of a wildfire. Something that we may experience, and there may be a need to use the groundwater to offset any loss for whatever reason if there's a wildfire in this community or one of our surrounding communities. Moving on to the guidelines. The guidelines limit the usage to the 400 acre feet per year for regular domestic purposes, which is consistent with the current permitted volume. It's also consistent with previous council approval. So there's no proposal to increase the amount of water produced by the Elias well or in the groundwater system. And the third component is monitoring. That's included in the use plan. We'll continue monitoring shallow and other wells in the vicinity of the Elias replacement well. We'll continue to coordinate the monitoring with Mendocino County Resource Conservation District, and Councilwoman Strong, do you have your hand up? Sorry.
Councilmember Strong, we can't hear you. You're muted. Did you have a question that you need to interject before the end of the presentation?
Yeah, I do. I hope that's okay. Sorry, I just need a moment to figure out how to unmute. Two questions so far. One was regarding these allowable uses. I thought that the wording also allowed supplementing surface water when the water quality from the reservoir became compromised to a great extent. Isn't that one of the ones in the allowable use? And the other question I had was when you were explaining about the replacing the pipeline, I was confused about a 10-inch diameter pipe being proposed or an 8-inch, and what is the internal measurement of the kind of pipe we're using? Is it the internal width of the pipe? Is it 8 inches or 10 inches? And what are the volumes affected? That was earlier.
Okay, well, the first question, I don't have the document, the operational use plan open. I can check that. I've looked for it in everything that's open on my desktop, and it's not right there. And this is meant to just summarize. The document will serve as the detailed guidelines, and it provides it provides more description on the allowable uses. So can I check that and come back to you? With respect to the pipe, in order to avoid impacting the Baker's Meadow foam in the long 20, essentially between the two, for the length of the pipe, there's Baker's Meadow foam in different areas, and in order to do so, we had to switch to a directional drilling to reduce the amount of trenching in the open field and avoid Baker's Meadow foam completely. So to get the same capacity as an 8-inch C9, 8-inch PVC has an 8-inch inside diameter. 10-inch HDPE has, like, off the top of my head, I think it's 8.3 or 8.6. Scott might know that off the top of his head. It's something like that. It's just barely more. But an 8-inch HDPE is much smaller, so we wouldn't get the same capacity with an 8-inch HDPE. So that's the reasoning behind that change in the scope of the project.
Thank you.
Okay. Where was I? I think I was on the third bullet point on groundwater monitoring. An annual report will be prepared that outlines and describes what was experienced or what was found, provides some data for the previous year related to the pumping and how it affected surrounding wells. We'll have some more information related to how the aquifer responds to the specific pumping. With respect to testing, the operation use plan lists quarterly iron, manganese, and arsenic testing. Iron and manganese are required to be tested quarterly by the state for this groundwater system. Arsenic is required to be tested every 3 years. We through discussion and comment and revisions, we found the cost to test for arsenic is $55, and there's no reason not to just do that quarterly along with iron and manganese, so we can continue to monitor that constituent and, well, in this case, the lack thereof. There's never been any detection of arsenic in that well. So we are proposing, based on some discussions with the public, to add the language shown here to that section of the plan, which states, should any level of arsenic be detected in the future in the Elias replacement well, the operation of the plant will cease immediately, City Council will be notified, and the action necessary to ensure public safety will commence. Excuse me. And so that becomes a public process. It's simply, if at some point in the future that happens, it will be addressed in a public fashion. So, and there's a variety of other testing that's required by the Division of Drinking Water for this facility. Nitrates are required annually, and there's a regimen of testing that's required every 3 years. So, and finally, an annual plan review so that we can determine if there are any modifications, revisions, any enhancements are necessary for the plan based on what we learned in the year prior, excuse me. So, next slide, please. So that's really the change. We summarized the project, went over the change. Here's a summary again. There is no detectable level of arsenic in the Elias replacement well. It's been tested since 2014, and it's been non-detect every time. Quarterly testing for arsenic, as I mentioned earlier, has been added to ensure public health and safety concerns continue to be addressed into the future. As we discussed earlier, the two documents they serve different functions, and I think that's important to acknowledge. The scope of the project is enhancement of the existing system, and it doesn't propose an increase in usage. It simply proposes increase and improvement in the ability of the city to respond when it's needed. So, recommended actions: adopt a resolution approving the initial study mitigated negative declaration, and conditionally approve the construction of the groundwater resiliency improvement project with the adoption of the groundwater operational use plan. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anything further to add, City Manager Ben, here before I open it up to council members?
No, I was just wondering if it's possible to bring up the actual operations plan so we can share the screen, so we can just walk through that complete document. Do you have that loaded, Rod, or?
I don't believe I have the ability to share screen.
Okay. Kathy, do you have the document?
I can get it. You'll have to give me a moment, please.
Okay.
This is Andrea.
I think that would be very beneficial.
Kathy.
Like Rod noted, he just summarized it, and I just want to be very clear what is being presented to the council.
Andrea Trincato, did you have something to add?
I was just going to say that I'll send it to Kathy so she has it to load.
Thank you. At this time, I'll bring it to council members. Do you have any clarifying questions from our presentation or additional questions on this matter? Go ahead, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Actually, not a question as much as just, I want to thank staff. When I was asked during the draft document if I had any questions, I had mentioned the possibility of additional arsenic testing and was surprised to find out that staff had already brought that on, given the concern of our community previous meeting, mostly to put people at ease. But I really want to commend staff for taking that added measure.
Councilmember Strong?
Yeah, I have another question. There was a couple different gallons per minute mentioned in a couple different documents, I think. And I'm wondering, with the pipeline and the pump and, and the existing treatment facility there, with those proposed project improvements, what number of gallons per minute are we talking about being feasible just with the equipment? And then what does that equal in terms of daily or monthly or annual use if we were, using it basically for a period of time?
Good question. The original calculations were for a different setting, so I don't have those numbers immediately available. The purpose of I would just go back to the groundwater use plan, and the purpose of that is limiting the total usage regardless of how fast it's used or how quickly it's pumped. It doesn't. There's a limiting factor at that end of the distribution system, which is the pressure in the line. We don't know what that is, but we've already experienced just with what's the amount of water that can be introduced into the amount of water that goes into the distribution system increases the pressure at that end of town, and we can't go. There's going to be some point that it's going to create problems in houses, and we don't know exactly what that is. So I don't have a good answer for that question.
A follow-up. In the use operational use plan, you suggested the average monthly usage could be 10.9 million gallons, and that the annual usage could be potentially 130 million gallons, which is about the same as 400 acre feet. I'm just wondering, is that what this facility with these improvements is capable of? Because it's a large number. Those are very large numbers. That's what I'm driving at, and I'm just wondering if that's if at a future time somebody said, well, hey, we can produce this much, why don't we? Is that the upper limit?
I would consider that the upper limit. The 10.9 million gallons per month average is equivalent to roughly 131 million gallons, which is in the source capacity study, which was provided to the state when the facility was permitted. That equates to 400 acre feet, which was the number used in the 2017 agenda summary. And I don't recall the specific verbiage in that document, but it essentially said the usage will not exceed 400 acre feet per year. So that was August of 2017. August 9th, I think it was 2017, that was brought to City Council.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Connie?
Thank you. I appreciate Councilwoman Strong's questions about those numbers. Am I correct in understanding that in a typical year, Willits water users use about 800 acre feet from our surface water reservoirs? Is that about a roughly correct number?
That's correct.
Okay, so although the groundwater operational use plan is trying to give parameters to what the maximum amount could be, the number 400 acre feet is roughly half of our regular usage. And in my mind, that doesn't really compute to emergency use or occasional use for maintenance projects like flushing. And it definitely gives me concern that this operational use plan isn't limiting as much as the members of the public would like to see us limiting the groundwater usage.
I'd like to jump in here. This is Scott Herman, Public Works Director. Just for Councilmember Connie, in March, we used the groundwater plant 2 days. In February, we used it 7 days. So we're not using it unless we need to at this point. Or approximately 3.5 million gallons in those 2 months.
Total in those 2 months or each time?
No, total. So the plant's only capable of 450,000 gallons a day at 24/7 runtime. So it's 500,000 gallons a day, which is in the summertime half of our daily demand.
Okay. So I appreciate hearing that, and it's somewhat reassuring to hear that it's been used so little so far. But I think that the intent, at least for me, of the operational use plan was to get really clear, detailed reassurance that the minimum amount of groundwater would be used, and that this groundwater would be tapped solely for emergency and essential maintenance of our regular water system. And I've heard from many members of the public, Willits residents as well as Valley residents, and they have deep reservations about the use of groundwater for any kind of a regular basis. So to me, the guidelines as presented are a little too broad and don't really give a detailed focus as to how exactly this water will be used and in what capacity.
So this is Scott again, that number, that 10.9 was to put it in perspective of the maximum use per month, of equivalent to the 400 acre feet per year. Not that we're going to use that much.
Vice Mayor Connie? Oh, there you are. Okay. So could I just ask, in reading that, it doesn't sound like the overall document is in question for you. Would there be, based on public feedback, which I know I've received a significant amount, is there a number or a recommendation that you would make to staff if you were to revise that particular paragraph of the operational use plan?
I don't have a specific number in mind, but to me, including in the use guidelines the maximum that's allowable instead of what the actual intent is opening a door that I'm not ready to open, and that I don't believe that the members of the public are ready to either. And I just don't feel like I would be representing our community members well if I said, yes, let's accept a maximum number. Nobody wants to use the maximum number, and it even sounds as if staff doesn't want to use the maximum number. So then why don't we spell it out clearly what our intent is for the number and put that in the document so that everyone can see fully transparent what the intent is, what the number is.
Madam Mayor, if I may jump in here as well, I think what we're looking at is kind of, worst case scenarios, and we don't know, when we need to actually turn it on, what the end number is going to be. So, like Scott Herman indicated, the highest allocation number is 10.9 per month, and that's through the state permitted approval process that is in place right now. What this plan does, what this document does, is kind of spell out like it's noted, an operations plan. So here's the scenarios that we envision there will be a need for a supplemental source to our distribution system within that 10.9 guidelines or bookend for the month. We might be able to we might have to turn it on and utilize it for 1 million gallons or 2 million gallons, and it satisfies our need that was identified and responding to. So it's kind of we recognize as a bookend on one end, a critical need, but I think this gives us at least the flexibility for at the staff level to respond to needs and to provide sufficient services for the community, as well as give the reassurance to the council. What are the guidelines? When are we actually going to turn on the groundwater system and to provide that supplemental system to the surface treatment facility? That was the intent. That was the intent that we were working under and presented to the council.
Councilmember Strong?
Yeah, this isn't the sum of my comments. I wanted to wait and hear from the public, but on that particular point, if at least it said under use guidelines, maximum monthly use will be, that would be a lot better than average monthly use will be. Because that implies that we're going to do that most months, average. And I think we're looking for, at the very least, an upper limit in this document. And so that's just one little point there.
And I believe that's a point well taken and has been reiterated from our constituents. Are there any other council members that would like to ask clarifying questions before I open it up to the public? Okay, with that, I'm going to move to the public. If you've joined us late, you can enter your name in the chat and I'll call upon you. If you haven't mentioned your name, I have a list of names, and at the very end, if you haven't had an opportunity to speak but you wish to, I'll go ahead and give you an opportunity to do so. I see most of our callers have their line unmuted. So please either mute your line or be very mindful that everyone can hear you. We want to make sure that we give our full attention and respect to those that are speaking. Our first constituent speaking this evening will be Dr. Mills Matheson. You have 3 minutes, and when the buzzer goes off, then if you could finish up your comments. And I thank everybody for participating in the meeting today. Dr. Matheson?
I thank the staff for adding new language to the testing proposal. I am very glad that the groundwater system will cease to operate if any arsenic is detected in the well water. Thank you again.
Thank you. John Alameda, you're next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think there's two issues here, and I don't think that it's so important to have a completed operational use plan tonight. What I think is important is to have the environmental document completed so that you can move on with construction. If you looked at the letter that I wrote February 10th, that it speaks about 2 items that needs to be carefully looked at and determined and written into your policy, into your environmental document. So not only to protect Willits from future councils doing away with the operational use plan, with this document, with the wording I put into that letter, if that was added to the document, no future council could do away with your operational use plan. The second thing is, you would explain in there that we do have arsenic problems in some of the wells in Willits, and anybody that would want to come for a water grab, and there's going to be possibly 3 this year if this weather, it looks like it could be as bad as 1977. With that in mind, it'll let them know that we don't have train loads of water to be shipped out of here. And that's what we need to protect, both for the city and for the residents in the valley. So please look at my document. The other day, right afterwards, February 10th, I was on the meeting at the county's drought ad hoc, and I brought up the subject of arsenic. Jim Sullivan, which is a representative advisor to the Department of Water Resources for the state of California, when he heard my question, he said, arsenic can be present in a state that is not detectable, but if it's over-pumped, if that well is over-pumped, it can break it loose. And that concerns me. and we need to work on that. But that document, and that should be in the operational document. But we don't have to work on that tonight. Your operational document, you can't start construction until May 15th because you're in an environmental area, so you can't be trenching or anything like that. You got to May 15th to start construction. And there's a lot of issues that I have with that operational document. But in the interest to get this project going and they can order whatever supplies they need and they can move forward, I think we need to focus on the environmental document. In the environmental document, if you don't state what your issue is and make it sure that people in the future know your operational document can go away, and I presented that in my letter. So we really need to focus on that, and that can be decided, and that language can be changed in a half an hour by somebody who can type it out. But if you'll read my letter, it states very well that there is an arsenic problem, that we have a good well and we have a bad well. We actually have 2 bad wells in this city. So 67% of the water is contaminated, the city wells. And that means you need to look at it real close. You also have other cities that are going to want to come in here if they have problems this year, whether it be Mendocino. There's no guarantee that Ukiah is going to feed Mendocino. They promised to feed Mendocino with well water last time, and they ended up giving them Russian River water. So that means Department of Water Department, I can't remember it's not the Department of Water Resources, it's the other one. But anyways, they kind of turned a blind eye to that, and they let them feed Russian River water to the trucks that took it to Mendocino. They may cut that off this year. That State Department may not turn a blind eye to that. And if that happens, Mendocino's coming here. And Covolo's in hurt because of the people over-pumping the cell of the dope grows. But they may want to be coming to here. And then you got 5 water districts between Redwood Valley to Hopland that need that water. And Lake Mendocino's in big hurt.
Caller's time is up.
All right. Well, they're not transferring, so anyway, you know the picture. We need to get that document. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alameda. Our next speaker is Devin Bower, I believe, of Mendocino County Farm Bureau.
Yes, hi, good evening, Council. First, I want to say it was appreciated to see the groundwater operational use plan. There was improved transparency of where the city may be going in terms of groundwater use. Several questions come back, though, that were alluded to by council members and members of the public. The questions that we still have is in relation to memorializing the mitigation actions that have now been included into the use plan, such as, looking at the capacity of the groundwater use and capping that at 400 acre-feet per year. And is that really truly consistent with the verbiage in the environmental document? I didn't go through it line by line. Looking at the ISMND that was included with the packet tonight, it still had a January revision date. So the assumption that I made, right or wrong, was that there wasn't any incorporation of any of the verbiage within the use plan to be consistent with the policy on the environmental review within the ISMND. If that is incorrect, I'd like clarification on that. We did hear tonight that these 2 documents serve different functions, and I think that's where some of the concern lies. If the project, as we have seen it in comments in the past, is almost 2 parts. There's the construction phase, which has sort of been the focus of the negative declaration, hasn't really fully vetted the actual other part of the project, which is the groundwater use. So all of those questions were further addressed within the use plan. However, like mentioned by the previous caller, it's really the important part of tonight to make sure that environmental document actually is serving the function of incorporating concerns over the totality of both parts of that project, the construction phase and the groundwater use phase. So although it is appreciated that you have worked to improve upon some of the questions and clarification, there is still concern that we have that the negative declaration in the environmental document does not fully account for or even explain sort of the totality of the project in full. So I just want to reiterate that tonight and encourage the council to consider ways of melding those two documents. You know, I don't think we feel like they serve as two different functions. We feel that the ISMND should fully describe the project in both parts, and that the secondary component of where the use plan was put in place should find some way to be memorialized within that document. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Richard Esterbrook.
Thank you. I'm going to read the letter that I submitted to the council this afternoon. This letter is regarding the proposed operation of the Elias 2 well as a supplemental water supply. I appreciate the diligence of the City Council to secure additional water resources for the city and understand the need to use this well. My comments are directed at the radius of influence that is used to identify possible contaminating activities, which also includes existing wells in the basin. I believe the radius of influence is significantly understated for the reasons I described below. My background, I'm a retired petroleum engineer who worked for the U.S. Department of Interior for over 34 years. My responsibilities included analyzing pump tests for geothermal and oil and gas wells and developing reservoir models. The methods I use are virtually the same as those used by hydrologists for aquifer analysis. I recently started a small water testing business on the coast using the same methodology. Part of the groundwater assessment well source, that document, details the calculations used to determine the radius of influence for a given flow rate and time period. The analysis concludes the following for a flow rate of 600 gallons per minute and an assumed porosity of 0.2. For 2 years of pumping, 1,496 radius of influence. For 5 years of pumping, 2,365 feet of radius of influence. And for 10 years of pumping, 3,346 feet for radius of influence. There are two problems with these calculations that result in an understated radius. One, the equation used in the analysis assumes that the water in the aquifer is drained as if it were confined in a giant underground cylindrical tank with the well in the middle of it. In reality, the water level in the aquifer surrounding a producing well forms a type of cone, often referred to as a cone of depression. A cone contains much less water than a cylinder does, therefore the radius of a cone would have to be much larger than the radius of a cylinder to hold the same amount of water. More importantly, this is item 2, the use of porosity in the equation implies that the aquifer is assumed to be unconfined. In an unconfined aquifer, water gravity drains from the pore space in the rock and flows into the well. The amount of water that can be drained from a given volume of rock increases as porosity increases. However, this is a confined aquifer, and porosity has little relevance to the radius of influence. In a confined aquifer, the aquifer is always full. Water is not drained from the pore space in the rock as it is in an unconfined aquifer. Instead, water is driven to the well by compression of the aquifer as water pressure is reduced through pumping. As a result, the cone of depression in a confined aquifer spreads very fast and can cover large areas. A quick calculation from the Elias 2 well test based on conservative estimates of aquifer properties yields a radius of influence of over 3 miles after just 32.75 hours of pumping. Clearly, the radius of influence would cover the entire aquifer in a relatively short period of time. Significant conclusions, significant pumping from the Elias 2 well has the potential to interfere with other wells in the aquifer and to draw in water from arsenic-contaminated areas of the water. I don't believe the current analysis adequately addresses this risk. I recommend the city retain a registered hydrologist to perform a hydrologic well test similar to the ones required by the Mendocino City Community Services District Ordinance 2020-1 to determine aquifer properties and make calculations as to the radius of influence. Based on their conclusions, I also recommend the city consider developing a hydrologic reservoir model as stated in section 6.3.2 of the groundwater monitoring plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Randy Dalton.
Yes, my husband went to Berkeley and graduated in conservation of natural resources, and for his senior thesis, we studied 32 wells from Casper on the coast to Alamo in Contra Costa County, throughout this northern California region. We studied permeability, percolation, whether it was sand or local loam or clay, the amount of water that was able to be derived from the wells, the quality and the quantity was impacted by the soils. And I think that this last man that just spoke about the radius of influence, I think that we need to have an ongoing environmental assessment. The valley here is low to loam primarily because it's an inland delta with humus, a lot of humus, and because of the redwoods and the fish, the salmon. I haven't heard anybody talk about the salmon. I am a salmon woman. I believe very strongly that we have many tributaries for the South Fork of the Eel River that are headwatered here, that come from this region. They bubble up from down below. There are artesian wells. There are, I'm going to quickly go over, there's three main kinds of wells that we determined. The ones in Casper, they were bedrock. They filled up. When they were done, they were done. In August, they dried up. They were gone. You had to either ship water in. My mom had access to the Union Lumber Company, and their well was deeper than hers, and so we could draw water from that. There are underground water aquifers that are underground rivers. If you can tap into a well that's, will fill up again, you can use it, the ones that we had in Laytonville. I'd like to see some studies done. And it would go empty, but it would fill up again overnight because we were adjacent to a 25-acre pond. And if you can get into an underground river, that's the Eel River is here. There is a carrying capacity to the water. And you have to understand, Mother Earth is a living, viable, breathing, intelligent, balanced, in harmony. And if we think that we can just keep extracting the resources, the natural resources that are God-given, and not have any impact, we're sadly mistaken. We don't need to destroy. You don't kill the chicken to get the golden eggs. We have to work in harmony and balance. We are intelligent human beings. Before you sign a blank check saying, you're going to have a document that's going to be, the ground level for the future, you've got to know there are limits to growth. If you take 200 acre feet of water and the wells are dry, it does no good. The numbers do not assess accurately what the conditions of this valley are. If the droughts continue, one year we have 13 inches of rain, another we might have 60. So, I would like to recommend that there be some kind of an ad hoc committee or permanent committee for this, our city council.
I'm sorry, Mayor, the caller's time is up.
Okay, environmental studies. Study Laytonville.
Thank you, Randy. Our next speaker is Ellen Drell.
Thank you, Mayor Rodriguez. I just want to say that Devin, from speaking on behalf of the Farm Bureau, certainly pointed out a source of great confusion and difficulty in this project, and that is an attempt to separate the two functions, the construction of the equipment and actually pumping of the well. And I feel that is what's caused this dilemma here. And the two functions should not be separated. They should be joined. And the negative declaration should obviously include both functions. However, I would suggest, because I agree that the city is correct in wanting to have a backup emergency water supply system, and I certainly support that effort. I support having the Elias well online as a source of clean drinking water. So anyway, going to the operational use permit, I appreciate Councilmember Strong and Councilmember Connie's questions about it. There is language right now in the operational use permit that leave it open-ended, and I think that that language needs to be eliminated. In particular, on line 4 under the paragraph entitled allowable circumstances for use of the groundwater system. And it says, when the council determines the use of groundwater is necessary to support needs of the community. I mean, that's totally open-ended. And again, the description that talks about the actual use guidelines refers to the 10.9 million gallons and the 400 acre feet, and certainly doesn't state those as either a maximum, and even as a maximum, there's no indication that those are sufficiently limited or low enough to protect the aquifer. And then I just want to look briefly at an issue that's related to what Rich Estabrook brought up, and that's the city is basing its decision basically on one thing, and that's the permit from the Division of Drinking Water. And all that permit says is that the Elias well right now appears to have potable water. And there was a well test done that pumped the Elias well at various gallons per minute and established these radiuses of influence. And Rich Estabrook described how that particular pump test did not give an accurate picture of the radius of influence. So, first of all, the radius of influence is inaccurate. Secondly, there is nothing in that permit that speaks to the impacts of continual pumping. There is nothing in that permit that addresses the potential for arsenic. The Division of Drinking Water had no idea of the existence of the Long 20 well. I do not believe. I don't see any evidence of it. And they weren't really aware that arsenic was a problem in Little Lake Valley. All the Department of Drinking Water did was tell the city of Willits, yes, the Elias well has potable water in it. So I think that's pretty flimsy documentation for the council to be able to say that to pump at 10.9 million gallons per month or 400 acre feet per year is acceptable and won't suck in contaminants and won't have impacts on neighboring wells. All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and please take these things into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Next speaker is Rosamond Carter.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Rosamond. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Rosamond Crowder, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak. I live outside the city, but I consider Willits my hometown. I eat at local restaurants, and I have many friends who live in town. I have thought I might want to live in town in my elder years, and to think that the city water could have arsenic in it and the wells in the valley could be compromised is very sad and even frightening to me. While I support the use of groundwater for backup, I do not support using groundwater at a rate described in the operational use plan. And I also agree that the construction phase and the use phase being separated as it is, the way this initial study has it, really points out that the what is listed in the operational use plan that we just saw last Friday, 5 days ago, is very different from what was shown on February 9th, which was clearly emergency use and backup. And so this 400 acre feet a year, which is about half of what the city uses in a year, is a lot of water, and I don't feel the effects of using this amount of water have been adequately studied. And it's very clear that Long 20 is still in the project, and the initial study in mitigated negative deck, even the revised version, does have Long 20, including the SCADA facility, which aims to remove arsenic, but may not move enough. And the council approved the Department of Drinking Water's permit for use of Elias well, but that was before Long 20 was built. And I have spoken with the Department of Drinking Water, and they do know nothing about Long 20. And I believe they have no knowledge that Long 20 has high levels of arsenic. And it is new information to me that a confined aquifer behaves very differently from an unconfined aquifer, that water can travel very fast and for long distances in a confined aquifer. I know that both Elias and Long 20, only 2,460 feet apart, are in the same confined aquifer, and arsenic levels in Long 20 are much higher in the lower parts of the well where that aquifer is. I would hate to have the city contaminate Elias with arsenic. I urge the council to expand the initial study to include information about how water moves in a confined aquifer. I urge the council to include the effects of pumping water at the rates described. Simply saying that because studies from the 80s determined there was a lot of water in the ground does not mean aquifers cannot be compromised by chemicals migrating, fewer months with high water tables, and less water in streams. So I do not believe there's, anyway, I'm urging caution and to include the effects of pumping at the proposed rates in the initial study before you approve the initial study. And I want to thank you again for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Rosamond. Our next speaker is David Drell.
Yes, Mayor Rodriguez, thanks for the opportunity. I guess I'll be very brief. I also think that Willits is smart and a good choice to have a backup system, but I'm worried that the backup system is ending up being way more than a backup system and an emergency system. And I agree entirely with Kevin from the Farm Bureau that the operational use plan should be incorporated into the initial study negative deck in order to memorialize that in a way that gives the public confidence that the city will be operating in compliance with the operational use plan under the legal requirements of the initial study. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And Sherry, you're next.
Sherry Ebiam. Hi, good evening, Mayor Rodriguez and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Our drought is not a blip on the screen. Like, it's not an unusual once in a while occurrence. I think of drought as the new normal, and all indicators point to hotter, drier climate conditions. In light of this, I believe it's the time to protect our groundwater ever more cautiously. The groundwater system should be used as a backup system and not a source for routine water supply. And backup means, I heard earlier tonight that Willits users use about 800 acre feet per year. And in this operational plan, it would allow up to 400 acre feet per year. That opens the door to using possibly 50% of all the water that Willits users use. That hardly could be called a backup plan, if that's what it is. And as I mentioned, this being the new normal in terms of available water. The other thing I heard tonight was, well, we've said 400 acre feet, but we're not using it unless we need to. And a couple of months' use was given to us, numbers, which the implication was that it's not used that much. So my question is, why set the limit so high? And then Councilwoman Connie was asked to make a recommendation instead of 400, and I don't see how anyone could make a recommendation without adequate monitoring and testing over time, not like just today, but over time, as this is used on a regular basis What are the effects of that use over time? And to begin with smaller amounts of use to establish benchmarks that could then be projected going forward. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Are there any other callers or individuals that would like to speak to the council that have not already spoken?
Yes, I am. My name is Jen Miller.
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. This is a big project. The scope of it is not indicated in this MND. In fact, I'm kind of confused as to why the city of Willits' lead agency hasn't given an environmental agency the project in which to write the environmental impact report, such as I don't see that CDFW was referred for public review or the Regional Water Board. And it just seems that with a project of this size, it needs to be mentioned the whole impact of the entire scope. And with this, there are no alternatives that have been listed, as this has been given our only option. I just don't think that it's appropriate to finalize this without more impact reports, and certainly with more impact from environmental agencies that have the wherewithal and the understanding for this. Willits is a very sensitive, very active biological area, and I don't think that this has been taken into consideration with the understanding of the environment. And the summer steelhead weren't mentioned, the yellow leg frogs. There's a lot that's happening here with the displacement and the removal of the environment or the sensitive biosphere that it is. And I would ask that the council consider offering this opportunity to review this with an agency that can look at it in depth rather than what this MND has included thus far. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Do we have any other individuals? Judy Burtis, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm concerned about my water well. I live here in the city, and I have a water well at my house, which has clean, potable water. But I swim out of Bobby's ranch in the valley, and she lives on a dirt road, and therefore grow sites on it. And the house at the end of the road, their wells, all of a sudden dried up just after one of the new grow sites had a well digging unit there for 3 days. And all of a sudden our wells were dried up for a while, and then they recharged. But they never did that before. And my thought goes with, I think we're doing like a cross-country marathon car race without knowing where the gas stations are, what kind of fuel our car needs, how much gas we can hold in the car's tank, and how long we can stay awake and drive. I just think that we don't have enough information. In the hospital where I work, we had to make a 10, 50, and 100-year plans in our policies and procedures. And I don't see a 10, 50, and 100-year plan for the water of the valley. And I'm really concerned because I know that I have been asking for a couple years of how much water we have in the aquifer under the valley, John Sherman said, oh, there's water there. You'll never need to worry about it. We have so much water, we can give it away. Okay, well, that's a lot different than what I've heard today. The problem is there's not enough. We need measurable, documented standards in this water policy, and it needs to be attached to the EIR. And we need to know how much water they have the location of the wells all over the valley and the city. They don't have a clue in hell of how much water. The county does not have a clue in hell about how much water is being taken out of each well. The city measures its water, but it's way too expensive for a private party with a well to know that. So we don't have the science. We don't have the baseline of knowing how much water we have and of how much water is being taken out of this valley. And I am concerned because I feel, as was stated before, that the drought is the new normal, and we shouldn't be planning for this year. We need to be planning for 100 years. And so I would urge the City Council to delay adopting this and to have it attached to the EIR, something that would be enforceable in the future and not just hanging out there as a policy that can be changed by the mailman. And, yeah. So you get my point. I'm really concerned, and I don't think we're prepared to adopt this. I think we need more science-based basis for these decisions. Thank you for this, and I really support having it. The other thing I'm concerned about is the one pipeline coming down from the hills that carries the city water.
I'm sorry, we are as an earthquake away. Time is up.
Thank you, Ms. Burtis. Thank you, Judy. All right, I'm about to close the public comment portion. If everybody's had an opportunity to speak. Okay, if you could mute your lines, we're going to bring it back to council. I see Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yeah, I guess first of all, let me state that I think that we are looking at a drought situation this year. I mean, I know it's kind of a weird time because it's raining this week, but I think that we're going to have to move into some sort of conservation earlier, I think, and maybe stay in it longer as we move on. I think it's nice to have that. And I thank Judy for that comment earlier about the one pipe coming into town, so to speak. I think we've had some close calls in the past. So I have some questions for Rod. The 400 acre feet number one, where did that originally come from? And then number two, you kind of, from hearing from the public today and everything, and I know you asked Greta, but is there a top end number or a number you could propose to us today that, as far as a monthly number that we look at? I mean, dealing with emergency services, I always you plan, what's that say? You plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I guess that's why. So I'll let you see if you can answer that for me.
Sure. This project originated with the intent. It originated back in 2014. That's when it started. And the groundwater treatment plant and some piping and the Elias replacement well were constructed under drought emergency conditions. That was the 2014 drought where everybody had to conserve water. The city residents did a great job and cut usage down by 20%. So we constructed the facility. It was exempt from CEQA, and it was permitted in 2016 for an estimated usage, I believe is the term in this permit, of 131 million gallons per year, and that's 400 acre feet. So since that time, since 2016, the maximum volume that's been used was, I believe, 23 million gallons in 2019. So the city's been able to use up to 400 acre feet since 2016. It was formalized, brought to City Council in 2017 as an additional. We consulted planning professionals on how to deal with how does this system get adopted by the city as essentially a full-time, we're considered a full-time production well, a full-time source. How does it become something that the city uses outside of emergency circumstances, uses for regular operations, uses for maintenance purposes? And it turned out that the decision was another notice of exemption was filed. So it was considered exempt from CEQA because there was no project. Everything had already been constructed. And the question comes like, well, did you consider the 400 acre feet? In every bit of documentation we have says that this is a very healthy aquifer, and the capacity, storage capacity is significantly greater than 400 acre feet, and 400 acre feet would have no significant impact on the environment. So there was no environmental analysis that would have happened based on that number and that usage. So by association, when we considered the use plan, we used that number already approved and already in place. That's been the limit for 6 years now, or going on 6 years. The source capacity study was done in 2015, and that's when we looked at those numbers, and that's when it was presented to the state. In 2016, that system was permitted as a second. So when the permit shows the surface water and the Elias replacement well, and it was permitted at that rate. And even with that number being in place, the most usage was far less than that. And last year was in 2020, 0 groundwater was used. In 2021, we since it wasn't used, we had to go through quite a lengthy process to repair the groundwater treatment plant. And in November and December, a total of 16 million gallons was used during flushing. So that was 8 million gallons per month, roughly, and that equates to about 50 acre feet. The 23 million gallons used in 2019, that equates to about 70 acre feet, I think. And so considering the history, that's just the natural progression for this document. That would be the number we use. Is there a limit? I would say, we could say 8 million gallons per month, maximum 8 million gallons per month, except for unless there's an emergency. 8 million gallons per month is what was needed to do the routine annual flushing, which is super important for the city to control to control groundwater, flush the system, get the sediment out that comes in, and everything else. I think there's a couple things that just real quickly that were lost. All agencies were consulted: Regional Water Quality Control Board, CDFW, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for this document, this initial study. This initial study is for the project, which was outlined in the slide, which is replacement of pipe, building a tank, replacement of a pump in a system that is already there. It's already in place. This is not a new thing. The quantity is not new. This is not something that's being presented as the project. This is simply the explanation of the guidelines that we're trying to establish to move forward, so that people understand better the proposed uses and some of the steps that the city is taking to monitor not only the quantity but also the quality. So does that answer your question? Your questions? Does that provide some background?
I think it had some clarity there. It sounds like we obviously don't want to overuse. We want to be good neighbors, but we want to make sure a plant not used could be a plant that's not ready to go in an emergency. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you, sir.
All right, I'd like to chime in here quickly. I know there were some concerns over that maximum 10.9 million gallons per month, and what we heard is that the most we've ever used is 8 million gallons per month between November and January. So maybe a better reference point might potentially be that 8 million gallons. Just a thought. And Councilmember Strong, go ahead.
Thank you. So there's several things that are very concerning to me. One of them is even though I appreciate that staff is going to test for arsenic every 3 months, that's great, and that the policy that they're now proposing that if they find arsenic, they would immediately stop and and not continue to use that water source. However, at that point, all the horses have left the barn, and it's too late to get the arsenic out again. And one of the major concerns that people are raising is as we pump a lot, if we pump a lot out of the Elias well, we could, in fact, contaminate our nice water source there. We are so fortunate to have a clean water source at Elias well. And a half mile away, we have one that has a lot of arsenic in it, the Long 20. We do not have any data that reassures me that when we start pumping at a increased rate than what we have so far, that we wouldn't in fact draw arsenic into the Elias well. So that's one thing. I appreciate that if we do contaminate our own well, we'll stop, but it's too late. You can't turn it around. That's one thing. And then another thing, the cone of depression and the influence, what do you call it, that Mr. Estabrook talked about, those things concern me, and it appears that we're not using up-to-date scientific measurements and an appropriate way to measure that area of influence. And in the actual ISMND on page 42, there's a statement, page 42, the aquifer test on which let's see, I'll read the whole thing. An aquifer test conducted by GHD on the Elias replacement well in 2015 recommended a production rate of 600 to 800 gallons per minute, considering 20 to 40% safety factor. The aquifer test on which the recommendation was based was performed by continuously pumping the Elias replacement well at 400 gallons per minute and monitoring surrounding wells. The wells connected to the same confined aquifer as the Elias well experienced drawdown during the aquifer test. The wells accessing groundwater from the confined aquifer are generally described as those developed with screening deeper than 60 feet BGS. So apparently shallow wells weren't being affected, but other deeper wells that are in that same confined aquifer were affected. That, to me, is a reason for concern. That is not referenced as anything requiring in the document. It is ignored. That could be a concern. And then in the mitigation measures, the only mitigation measure under hydrology is that as we're building the pipeline, if there's water flowing into the digging area, we have to be careful what we do with that water. It doesn't address how much water is pumped. And I think several of the commenters pointed out that there really was not ever an environmental assessment of the degree of pumping. We got an emergency waiver of environmental assessment when we did it on an emergency basis in 2014, and then in 2016 and 17, we got a waiver because the equipment was already there and the well was already drilled, so we didn't look at it. All we are now looking at in the ISMND is only the pipeline, the holding tank, the contact well contact tank, and the pump. And I think we never did an environmental assessment of what would happen if we used this well to its maximum potential. I'm not comfortable, first of all, approving the ISMND without mitigation required for how much we're going to use this well. That means we don't have it in there at all right now. There's no mitigation required. We can adopt an operational use plan, and we can tinker with what the numbers ought to be there. It's probably a good idea. Clearly, the public wants it. I want it. I don't want us to contaminate our own well or to affect the aquifer in a negative way. And so the environmental document has to address that, and it doesn't. I'm sorry, because it does mean going back to another review process, but really we don't have this information in front of us. As was pointed out by somebody else, the Department of Water Resources, or the Drinking Water Division, doesn't even know about the Long 20 well and the fact that it has pretty high levels of arsenic in it. So anyway, I do agree with a number of the comments that whatever we do tonight, we have to incorporate a mitigation measure into the environmental document, which is, sort of holds us to that standard for the future. Whereas the use plan is something that could be changed by any future council, or even somebody comes begging for more water and we go, oh, wow, okay. As I said before, if you have the capacity to do it, you could be tempted or pressured into using more of that water. There was another comment that I had about the environmental document is sort of based on what Rod just referred to, is the fact that we have this basin, groundwater basin, has tons of water in it, okay, many millions or thousands and thousands of acre feet, but it isn't one big underground lake. If it were, we wouldn't have a clean well. We'd have one with arsenic probably. So you can't just compare how much water we're pulling from this one well to the entire Little Lake Valley groundwater basin. We have to look at that confined aquifer that we are actually drawing from. And I think from what Mr. Estabrook said is, with a reasonable amount of money, we could get some very specific studies that would help really scientifically analyze what our options are and what the impacts of our choices are. I would not be comfortable approving a document and then that doesn't even basically put any constraint whatsoever on the pumping of this project. So I think those are my 2 points. I think that's it. I also want to say that I know that the staff has gone to a lot of work. I do want us to be able to move ahead with some improvements so that we have a really well-functioning backup and emergency system available to us. I think that's really important. We already do have that right now, but some improvements would be great. But I don't want us to approve a document that is so open-ended that just doesn't put any constraints on it. Thank you.
Wilburn, you look like you wanted to respond. Go ahead.
Getting muted. The state was consulted about the Long 20 well, and they're well aware of the arsenic level in the Long 20 well. They considered it very treatable, actually, potentially treatable to a non-detect level. That was one thing. I think there's something in the agenda packet on somewhere in the agenda packet, there's a letter from on page 100, I think. Anyway, I just want to point that out. I would also, just for some context, the original Elias well, a couple things, has been pumped since the 1950s for agricultural purposes. I don't know at what rate. I can't speak to that, but it was a different time back then. I believe the calculations that GHD did and we added on to for the radius of influence are with the parameters and the equation required by the state. I think the state says this is how you calculate it, and I believe that's that. My best recollection is that's how that number was determined. That's all I have. So I think Matt Foster was the engineer that was consulted at this Division of Drinking Water regarding long 20 well and the arsenic levels. So, in case you want to contact him.
Councilmember Connie.
I've spent a lot of time talking with community members about this incredibly sensitive, controversial issue. In the last week, I received 14 emails, which is more than I've received on pretty much any other topic. I had at least half a dozen face-to-face conversations that lasted more than 45 minutes with residents, and multiple phone calls to my place of business. This is a very important conversation to be having. When I looked at the documents that were presented and provided in our packet, one of them was the agenda summary report from 2017 from Rod. And essentially it was brought to that council to, it seems to me, change from the policy of emergency use of groundwater to supplementing our surface water supplies. In the memorandum, in the summary report, it says the benefits of supplementing surface water are considerable. The city is not short on surface supply except in extreme drought circumstances. And so the use of the well does not increase the total amount of water used by consumers. Instead, it has the following advantages. It allows the city to have better tasting water, more flexible reservoir management, more energy efficiency, lower operational costs. It talks about using less water from the reservoirs, leaving them deeper and less susceptible to warming events that lead to algae blooms and bad tasting water. And so when I read that summary report, it is essentially asking council to change policy from the use of groundwater as an emergency to a regular usage. And certainly the numbers presented in the operational use plan indicate that that is the intent. What I have heard and what we have heard tonight is that the residents of this community do not want groundwater to be used for regular everyday function. They want it reserved for emergencies. And they feel very concerned about the changes in the environment and the deepening drought and the lasting impacts to our environment that none of us truly knows. When we look at the groundwater storage capacity provided in the IS, it's indicated in 1965 from the Cardwell study that our Little Lake Valley has a groundwater storage capacity of 50,000 acre feet. The DWR the same year said 91,600 acre feet. And yet in 1986, just 20 years later, the Farrar study suggested that the capacity was 35,000 acre feet, quite a lot less. We don't know what it is today because no one can see into the valley. We don't have a study that says exactly what the capacity is of acre feet. And while Rod's comments are all very reasonable and sound very reassuring and suggest that this use of water, this 16 million or 18 million gallons in a year, wouldn't negatively impact the aquifer. We just don't know that with any certainty. And as many people have commented, we don't have up-to-date studies. We don't have long-term monitoring that gives us a real understanding of what the draw will do, not only to the city supply, but to the supply of those who live in the valley and depend on that water as well. I cannot feel comfortable saying yes to this environmental study because to me it does not address the concerns. It was said early on tonight that the environmental impacts have already been sufficiently addressed. And yet, if you talk to any of these people who spoke tonight, none of them believes that to be true. I don't think we can say yes to this when there are so many concerns about the environmental impact of regular use of groundwater.
Sabrina?
Yes?
This is Larry. I'm for the water usage the way that it stands. And the one thing that nobody that came on to to talk to the council said was, how many wells has the county approved in the valley that pull out of the aquifer someplace? Nobody knows anything about that. They don't know how deep it is or anything else because the county's not giving any of that out, if they even know it. And so my thing is that it has been brought to our supervisor about this, and he has no idea. And so if that's really the way it is, and the county just can do whatever they want to do, and obviously that's what they do, then the only one that's held accountable to anything is the city. And I think that that's wrong, and I think that everything that the staff has done, they've done a really great job, and I'm for it, and that's my answer to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Stransky. I know that each of us have received many letters from those of you that are here tonight and those that couldn't be here. You've really challenged us with some questions to ask, some things to think about, to research and then fact check and research again. And we've all spent a significant amount of time trying to do due diligence on this. There's been lots of good points brought up. I know Councilman Stransky just touched a little bit on, the city's intent is to do the right thing, and I know that City Manager Bender and I we meet monthly with Supervisor Haschek, and often the topic is about water and what is happening, regulate water within the county and concerns. I appreciate those inside the city and outside the city who've expressed concerns about, the cone of depression and how it's impacted by city use. But we've talked very little about the impacts of the unregulated use. It's kind of the Wild West when it comes to water outside the city limits. And although the city can do more, this is something to keep in mind. And I would hope that that passion about water carries over to encouraging our supervisors to regulate outside the city limits in the county. I did want to address a comment that was made about what it is we're doing here this evening, because to me it seems that we're talking about the environmental impacts of putting in the footage of water main, the pump, and installing the new tank. The council's already made the decision in 2016 as to the amount of water that can be used, and that's demonstrated in the fact that during those 3 or 4 months of the year that we were using the 8 million gallons. So the city already has the ability, the right, and is currently able to pump 8 million gallons. So I just want to make sure we're really clear as to what it is we're approving here today, even though the overall vision is super important. What we're doing here tonight, we don't want to lose focus of that either. So those are just a few comments. Councilmember Gonzalez.
A quick question to Rod, and then I want to say something else. But Rod, how fast is the recharge of the aquifer? Is that something that's quantifiable?
Yeah. Well, I think we'll know more as we with the monitoring plan that's in the groundwater use plan. But what we saw in October and November was just short of astounding. I don't know. It was significant recharge with whatever the amount of rain we had, 16 inches. I don't know. It depends on where you measured it. But we saw the Elias well rebound. We saw the Long 20 well rebound, and now the Elias well, even after that usage, is a little over 3 feet. I think it's about 3 feet above the ground surface. So it's back to darn near its where it is annually, like a maximum. Scott, do you have that number offhand?
I do. It's 2.7 feet currently above ground surface, and the low point we got in pumping November through January was ground surface. So it's come back up almost 8 feet.
Yeah. So it's recharges. We were pleasantly. I don't want to say pleasantly surprised. It just confirmed what we had learned in the past about the recharge of this aquifer. So.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, can I make a statement before I make a motion?
Feel free. Go ahead.
Right. Number one, I was sent a lot of emails and took some phone calls this week. And again, also I'd like to reach out to Dr. Matheson. Thank you for being the doctor of the community. Whether it was Remco or this, I appreciate your input. That resonated well, and it sounds like it resonated with staff too. So with that being said, I'd like to make a motion, and I know it may not be a popular one with some of the folks here, but that I recommend that we go with the plan, except with the proviso that we not exceed an average of 8 million gallons a month. And that's what I'm looking at, because I think that's the intent. It is an emergency, but we're trying to make sure it works. I mean, again, I did a lot of drills over the years, and we did a lot of things over and over in my former career to make sure things worked. And it was testing generators or doing those things. I know I'm not trying to trivialize water, but I am sorely afraid that we are going to be looking at this. And with that, I would also hope as a city and a community that we look at conservation efforts, and also I guess also challenge the county to work with us as a whole, because we can only control what's happening in the city. I'm sorry, county people, but your county, I think, sometimes fails in that respect. So that's my motion.
I'll second that. Larry.
Too much.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table. Council can continue discussion. Councilmember Strong?
Yeah, sorry, just making a note here. We never did put up on the screen the wording of the use limitations that were being proposed. And I'm assuming that, Jerry, that your motion is to approve the ISMND as it is, and the provision, what is it called? Basically, an intent to go ahead with the project, and the operational use plan. All three of those things is in one motion. Is that?
That is correct.
Okay, so in view of that, can we take a moment and at least, I don't think I'm going to be in favor of this in any event, but I do think that there's some wording in the use plan that I'd like to have us look at. Is that still available, Kathy or Dolores, to put up on the screen? I can tell you in particular, there was at least one thing in the first bullet point under when we might use the Elias well was in the event of an emergency, basically determined by the staff, and then it said this would be reported to the council at the earliest opportunity, and I wanted to at the very least say this would be subject to council review and approval at the earliest opportunity. And then, so that it's not just, by the way, we determined there was an emergency and we're now whatever. I mean, I think the point of bringing it to the council is that it should be subject to review. So there was previous part of it.
Thank you. Good.
The next screen down would help. Allowable circumstances. Oops, now it's too far.
Thank you.
Okay, one more up the screen. And one more. No, it's the allowable uses. Do you know what I'm talking about? Allowable circumstances. Okay, the very first one. Whoops, go back to that one. Okay, during emergency events when the public works determined. Do you want to go over that, Rod? Or because we never did go over these. If we're adopting them, I want us to make sure we know what we're adopting.
Right. Right.
Should I make my suggestion and see if the mover and the seconder agree? That first bullet point there says, Public Works Director or City Manager will advise the City Council of the emergency at the first viable opportunity. I'd like to see it say that they will bring it to the City Council for review and approval at the first viable opportunity, so that we would know not only that you've declared an emergency, but how long is it likely to, that we would have some City Council review of that determination.
Good.
And then the other one that I was asking about before was that fifth bullet point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to supplement the use of surface water for any, it says for any major fires. I thought it used to say if the water quality got compromised, but maybe I'm wrong.
You're right, Madge. There was some discussion at the prior meeting about things like algae bloom and that sort of thing that related to quality, and I didn't see it in this draft.
So that wasn't what I didn't read it carefully because I thought that's what it said. But what about that circumstance? What if the level in the lakes gets low enough that there's algae blooms and you're having to throw lots of chemicals into it and compromising the viability of the water from the lakes? So those are my two questions about that.
Rod, are any of those issues something that would impede an emergency? Or?
No, I don't. I didn't quite catch the second one, but the first, I don't see an issue with the first one, unless somebody else. Not from my perspective. So,
I think that the proposed language change, the verbiage change to that first bullet point, it can be done. And then for the last one, maybe there's an additional bullet point. Addressing the condition of the surface or the volume of the reservoirs, and if they get to a level where we need to maintain water within those reservoirs, that pumping from the groundwater facility would be acceptable, i.e. algae blooms.
I suppose you could consider that an emergency, but anyway.
Well, let's keep this. Well, let's just say hopefully it's an algae bloom situation. We have enough lead-in time that we can present that to a council at a regular scheduled meeting, and then council can advise and guide us how we want to proceed. Our intent here is not to run around willing to pull the emergency ripcord and start pumping. We want to give the council as much time when we need to access the facility. If you notice, a lot of these do have significant lead-in times that we would be well advanced maintenance, flushing. Those are the issues that we could see and get that to the council in a reasonable amount of time. Emergency situations with fire, or we have a complete breakdown at the surface facility. That might be something that we just work on immediately at the staff level, and then when we are prepared, to advise the council, we bring it to your attention as soon as possible. Definitely, the staff will have that communication with the mayor on almost an instantaneous basis, and then we'll build out from there.
Madge, I'm not objectable to your revision there for the bringing it back to council. That seems, again, we want to be as transparent as we can be with this, but again, I really am afraid of a drought situation and an emergency situation. So, and that's really where it's coming from, my heart. And so, okay, those are. I would amend my motion to include Madge's suggestion, at least on the bringing it back to council.
Good. Thank you.
Councilmember Stransky, you seconded the motion. Do you approve the amendment?
I did Jerry's, but that was all.
So we don't have, you don't want to second the amendments, is that correct?
Larry, I'm basically acquiescing to what Matt's suggesting, that it would come back to us, and I don't see anything, staff doesn't see anything wrong with that. So basically, if you're willing to, I'm amending mine and basically corroborate my amendment.
Thank you.
No, I think we ought to leave it the way we did it. And if there's 3 votes against it, and the way Madge wants to do it, then we'll re-vote it. She can bring it up again, and we'll vote on it again.
Put it right in now.
If you're on the line, be mindful that we can hear your comments. Please mute your line.
Okay, so I didn't quite get that, Larry. So basically, Madge just came back and just wanted that other language, which I have no problem with, and neither does staff. So it would come back to us, and we as a council would vote on it in an emergency.
Yeah, I just think that if that's the thinking of the 5 people or 3 people, whatever it is, that we go with the one that we had, that you made and I seconded, and if it works, good, and if it doesn't, then Madge can bring hers up and we can vote on that.
Yes, City.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, City Attorney.
Mayor Rodriguez, I just wanted to say that Madge Strong, Councilman Strong, is trying to do this by way of a friendly motion, and which is to informally ask the maker and a seconder to agree to her changes and to amend the motion that way. Alternatively, she can simply make her own motion to amend the motion that's on the table. And so if Councilmember Strong wants to make a motion to either replace the current motion on the table or to amend it by the way she has proposed, and should that be seconded, then that becomes the motion that's voted on first. If it fails, you go back to the original motion.
Thank you for that clarity. Go ahead, Madge.
Okay, well, I would rather just do this informally because I think it's a really, really minor change, and I think that's probably the intent of the language in the first place. But when it just says to inform the council, I think that the council should have an agendized item. And by the way, that's after the staff have already made a determination, because clearly you wouldn't, if the main pipe broke, you wouldn't schedule that for the next city council meeting. You would do the emergency action right away. But I'm just suggesting as a friendly amendment that if and when such a thing happened, that at the next opportunity, that would be brought to the city council for review, not just for information, so that it would be agendized, and they might, have suggestions from the city council. If you don't want to accept it as a friendly amendment, Larry, then I would make a motion to amend Jerry's motion with that little tiny change. easier to do it the other way, but.
All right, can I second Madge's, or that's not?
You can second Madge's motion if you so choose.
I will second Madge's amendment of my motion.
And by the way, voting yes on this doesn't preclude voting no on the whole thing.
Okay, I think I got it. So, and I get, Madge, where you're coming from. So I seconded your amendment to my motion.
Can we move ahead with a quick vote on that?
All right, we've had a lot to think about, and this evening and over the last couple of months and even the last couple of years. I have one question for City Manager Brian Bender about the recommendation for the hydrology study. In our operational use plan, we talked about testing and what would come to the council quarterly and annually. Is it possible that maybe a hydrology study could be added on that list?
Well, essentially anything's possible. A hydrology study, that's a very open-ended statement. I will point to Rod for some clarification there. That's, what we propose in the operations plan is the monitoring, and we're still trying to figure out, how, we can collect the data, we can process it. We want to make sure we get the clear information to the council and the public. A hydrology study is much more elaborate and complex. Am I correct, Rob?
You're correct. You cut out a little bit there at the end, but I think it's something that would need to be better defined as to the scope and the purpose. It's not something that would happen annually. It's something that would happen once.
Okay, I guess what I'm really asking is, we talked about the radius of influence, and we heard from one particular speaker tonight about the potential for the influence of 3 miles, and talked about the kind of depression. And maybe this item tonight isn't necessarily the right spot, but I would just ask that maybe at some later date we have this discussion further. Is that fair enough?
What I'm hearing is, I think that is acceptable. However this motion or several motions in sequence plays out tonight, if the approval is granted, we will look at what options are for a hydrology study and bring that back to the council. I guess what Rod, and I just want to echo Rod's comment, is that I think a hydrology study is going to be a separate standalone process that we will have to determine what the extent is, the scope, and then the budget for it. So how this plays out with the vote and subsequent action will dictate if the council wants staff to present a proposed project for a hydrology study in the future.
Okay, any further?
I would like to know what we're voting on exactly.
The motion that's on the table is the motion that was made by Council Member Strong, which amends the original motion by Councilman Gonzalez.
I understand that, but what does it say?
I don't have the exact wording, but in that first bullet point of the circumstances under which the system would be used, the second sentence of that, where it said, would be the city manager will advise the city council. Instead of that, it would say, will bring this to city council for review at the first viable opportunity for review and approval.
And the rest is the same, Larry.
And the rest is all the same.
Okay, thank you.
That's the amendment that I am proposing.
Okay, any other questions or comments from council? All right, we have a motion before us. I believe it is time to call for the vote.
Councilmember Strong?
Yeah, yes, and I just wanted to clarify again, that is not voting on Jerry's motion. It's only voting on changing that one little sentence in his motion. Thank you.
Wait a minute. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. We are voting on the motion that as amended by Councilmember Strong, and so that is Councilman Gonzalez's motion with the addition of this sentence.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand that because I thought it was only a motion to amend that one little thing, and that then there would follow a vote on his actual motion. Okay, well, in that case, I vote no.
Councilmember Gonzalez?
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Connie?
No.
Rodriguez?
I'm very unclear as to why Councilmember Strong voted no on her own motion. Well, however, this was a tough decision tonight, and you can answer before I answer, or I can answer whether it's a yay or a nay. Do you want to speak before I do?
Yeah, as I said earlier in my comments, I don't think the ISMND adequately gives us the information or alerts any future council on the fact that pumping at Elias Well could have adverse impacts on the aquifer. It actually not only it says it doesn't, and yet we all think it does. So to me, that is not an adequate environmental document, and it does not set the parameters or incorporate any parameters to address that environmental concern. It just says, oh, we already voted on that back in 2017, but we didn't know that that's what we were doing in 2017, and there was never an actual assessment at that time or now of the potential for impacts. So it's an incomplete assessment, and therefore that the use plan that we're considering is optional. It's, anyway, I explained that earlier, and I feel pretty strongly that that is not an acceptable way to proceed. That it's not an adequately defined concern in the environmental document.
Okay. I am voting yes. I believe that we need to finish the project that was started, and that we have a responsibility to our community and our ratepayers to have an infrastructure that works, and to ensure that we have resiliency in our water supply. I respect all of the comments, the questions, and I know that there's much work to do ahead, that this isn't the end of this matter, that there'll be much more discussion on it, but I do feel like this is the right call on this issue specifically that's before us tonight. So we have 3 yeses, 2 nays, so the motion carries. I thank you all for giving us your feedback this evening. And I will be moving on to item number 10, which is department monthly reports. They're normally presented at the second meeting of the month, so we have none. City Council announcements, communications, and reports. Do we have any City Council members with announcements, communications, or reports? I'll start with Councilmember Gonzalez.
You know, I don't have my notes handy, but I think you attended the League of Cities meeting the other day where we got some updates, and I think those were shared with City Manager Bender, who was also in attendance. And so in light of the length of this meeting, I won't go on to that. And then I think that's all I've got. And again, I want to thank the public for bringing things up to us. I do value their opinions. But thank you.
Councilmember Strong.
Yeah, I also thank people for paying so much attention to this and doing a lot of research and participating. So thank you for that. The Economic Development and Financing Corporation will be meeting tomorrow at 2:00 telephonically. So people are welcome to attend that. There's been a lot of loan activity, and that continues. And the following Thursday, April 21st at 10 a.m. Is the Mendocino Solid Waste Management Authority, also known as Mendo Recycle, will be meeting. And we are, the Mendo Recycle is still looking for a full-time general manager. We have an interim part-time general manager right now. The application process is still open, but anybody out there knows of people with some appropriate background in running a small agency and ideally knowing a little bit about trash would be great and how to recycle. But any ideas about that, please contact the Mendocino Recycle or contact me and I'll give you the contact information. I think that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Stransky?
I have nothing, thank you.
Vice Mayor Connie?
I have nothing, thank you.
All right, and I have nothing new to report this evening. I feel like we're all a bit wore out from a very difficult deliberation. Do we have any good and welfare? Go ahead, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Not sure if there's any tickets still left, but Sober Grad's doing a tri-tip dinner, and I think it's on the 22nd, so you get a hold of, I think they're selling them at Scoops and a couple other places in town. So it's to help the kids, and you get something to eat when you buy those tickets. So that's what I got.
Yes, that is good and welfare. Thank you. We need a bit of cheerfulness this evening. All right, we have nothing for closed session this evening, so that will bring us to an adjournment at, looks like I've got 8:58. And I thank you all for being here this evening and weighing in on this decision. I know it was a hard one. I'll see you all at the next meeting. Have a great night.